Hey my little Lunas, this is future editor Lovegood here. I just wanted to say I'm so sorry about the quality of this and how long it took me to make this. Absolutely nothing to do with the author or the fic itself. It had to do with technical issues, where I was filming. Everything just kept pushing this one back. The amount of times I had to re-record this, it's not great, but we got through it, yay! So I'm so sorry to everyone that this took so long to make. But I think that's all. Just sorry it took so long. Sorry for the horrible quality about halfway through, I think. Maybe 3/4, I don't know. I kept having to change where I was filming, and my phone kept going off for some reason that I still don't know of. My phone just kept turning off while, because I record on my phone while I'm reading off my laptop, as I think I said in the video at some point. So basically what that means is I'm using a recording app on my phone, but when my phone turns off, so does the recording app. Sorry if I sound a little rushed. I thought I was gonna have to re-record it for like the third time, maybe fourth, I don't know. It turns out the quality for at least the first half isn't as horrible as I thought it was. So now I'm just getting straight into editing. Sorry it took so long, sorry it's horrible, but yeah, let's get right into the video. Or well, my intro, I guess. Hello my little learners, you can call me @Lovegood, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Here are a few things before we get started. Today I'm presenting you with Chapter 3 of Ghostly Bonds by KittyKqt on AO3. Thank you KQT for letting me podfic this, if you ever somehow find this. Go give kudos to the author of the fic. Sorry this one's really late, I had no time to record because we are away. And as I mentioned in one of my posts, my old audio that I recorded, which was, I think it was like 3/4 of it, yeah, all that got deleted. And it was very quiet also, which I figured out too late. So I did the mic test properly this time, and it is not quiet, which is good. Anyway, enough of my rambles and jambles, and let's get right into the fic. This should be the summary. Inko visits Izuku. They visit his school. The notes for this one by the author of this fic are TW, descriptions of grieving parents, and talk of suicide. The sun creeped through the window, bathing the somber scene in a warm light. "Can I see him?" Mum finally asked, startling Izuku. Eraserhead nodded slowly. "It's not a pretty sight, Mrs. Midoriya." She stood up suddenly, her shoulders shaking as she tried to wipe away the last of her tears. "He is my son. He is the most beautiful thing in this world, and I will not let him go without saying goodbye." Her words caught as she cried again, forcing herself to stand tall. Izuku watched them walk out of the apartment, his mum cradled between the three men. He didn't know if he had the stomach to follow them out of his house, but he forced himself to leave right as the door shut behind them. He wouldn't make his mum do this without him. He would try to be there. His downstairs neighbour walked out as his mum and the detective passed, calling out, "Everything okay, Inko?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. Mum straightened up, taking a deep breath. "Just a case, Paul. I'm all good." Detective Tsukuchi rubbed her back as she didn't turn around to face the older woman. Izuku could see tears stream down her face as she forced her voice to be calm. "I'll make sure that troublemaker of yours doesn't go anywhere," Paul called, laughing slightly as she walked back into her house. Mum sobbed again as the men loaded her into the police car and took off down the road. He was alone again. He didn't know where to go from here. He had no directions to the precinct and couldn't ask anyone for help. Not that they would help him. Everyone in this neighbourhood had treated him like he didn't exist, like he was a plague to be left alone. Paul was one of the worst, but he would never tell his mum that. Not that he could anymore. He took a deep breath and shut his eyes, trying to take in the information from senses other than his sight. When he got overwhelmed, this had helped him before. He gasped as a scene came into his mind's eye, so much clearer than it had been before. Things were a weird mix of green and black shades, outlining the city in front of him, in a strange, comic-like style. What was most concerning were the three green shaded ropes that stretched away from him, all in the same direction. He opened his eyes and blinked. The only difference was that the ropes were no longer there, and the colours shifted. He shut his eyes and focused again, the strange scene showing up once more. The ropes were there as well, shifting and moving slightly, changing directions. He took a deep breath and reached forward. His hand made contact with the ropes as he pulled down as hard as he could. He screamed as he fell forward, the wind rushing past him quickly. He stopped moving and screwed his eyes tighter shut, trying to take a second. He opened his eyes to an entirely new scene, shops all around him. He was now in the middle of a street in downtown Musatafu. He shut his eyes again and saw the ropes shifting direction and changing. He watched them, confused, until they finally stopped moving as fast, twitching just slightly. He wrapped his hand around one gently and gasped when he could smell his mother's sweet tea mixed with her hand sanitizer scent. He removed his hand and grabbed another one gently, mint leaves and oranges filling his nose. He reached for the last one, the strong scent of coffee attacking him. He bit his lip and pulled, screaming as he was yanked forward again. He finally stilled and forced himself to open his eyes, blinking as he stared at Eraserhead beside him. He looked around, taking in his mum and Detective Tsukuchi and Officer Sansa. He needed to test something. He shut his eyes and forced the ropes to come up again, grabbing the one that smelled like mint and oranges. This time, the yank forward was less aggressive and quicker. He opened his eyes, now standing beside the officer. He tried once more with his mum's scent, pulling himself to her. She now stood beside him, and could clearly see the tears running down her face, even though she stood strong. He cursed himself silently, getting so caught up in a quirk analysis that he momentarily forgot what he had done to his mother. She wiped her eyes again, laughing slightly as she couldn't get the tears to stop. "We need to see Midori Izuku," Detective Tsukuchi said, handing his mum a tissue before showing his badge. The hospital receptionist frowned, biting her lip. "I can call someone to take you down," she said, hitting a few buttons. She put a phone to her ear, waiting a second before talking. "I need someone to take a detective down to the morgue." His mom bit her lip as it shook at the word. He was a monster for doing this to her, and he couldn't even comfort her. He tried to reach for her, but his hands hit the detective's wrist. "I'm here," he yelled, before he thought of it, and his hand slipped through. The detective jumped, looking around worriedly. "Did someone say something?" he asked Eraserhead as Izuku's mom grabbed more tissues from the counter. He rubbed at his wrist and looked around again. Eraserhead shook his head. "I didn't hear anything." The detective nodded, taking Izuku's mom's hands in his as the hospital staff member showed up and gestured them forward. No, Izuku had failed again. He bit his lip as they walked away, waiting for a bit. He shut his eyes and watched the scene appear again. A new rope added to the previous three. He touched each one in turn, trying to figure out which one was which. The third had a new scent, like fresh ink and sanitizer wipes. Izuku wrinkled his nose, pulling on the rope slightly. It ripped him forward, though less violent than the first time, until he stilled. He opened his eyes, the dim lighting the first thing that stuck out to him. The second was the way everyone shivered slightly, even Eraserhead, who was bundled up. Izuku didn't feel any colder, but he had been cold all night, since he died. Okay, sorry, I'm interrupting just a second. This is me, Lovegood. Sorry, I'm just interrupting, saying I moved the microphone angle because my phone kept going off, which is what I'm recording on. I'm got the Fic on my laptop and I'm recording from my phone, and my phone kept going off, which I'm really sorry about if there are any really quick cuts. It's because my phone kept going off. So, yes, let's continue. "Midori Izuku, correct?" the staff member asked, looking over her shoulder at Izuku's mom. She nodded hesitantly, and the staff member clicked her tongue, shaking her head. "He was just moved down here earlier. We tried our best, but it was the strangest case I've seen." She pulled a cabinet out, setting a long tray onto a movable bed, pulling it away from the wall. Izuku bit his lip as she grabbed the top of the blue sheet and pulled it down. Izuku stared at himself, lying motionless on the top of the metal table, his skin paler than it had ever been before. It was strange seeing himself for the first time, not through pictures or a mirror, just himself. His mum gasped, gripping the detective tightly and pulling herself onto him. Izuku could admit that he wasn't pretty looking at this moment. His hair looked matted and gross, blood holding his curls together strangely. His chest had a long scar across it, and his head had bandages all around it. His mom reached out, grabbing his limp hand and pulling it towards her lips. "My baby, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, kissing his hand and pushing his hair from his face. "I'm so sorry, Izuku baby." Izuku wiped at his tears, his chest screaming at him. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said, placing his hand over hers the best he could. He couldn't feel her warmth anymore, just the coldness from himself as they both sobbed over his dead body. She sobbed for him, and he sobbed because of what he had done to her. He shut his eyes and wheeled the ropes forward, taking his mum's with his other hand. Her scent hit him, and he just held it there, afraid that if he let go, she would leave him. He had left her, and he would never be able to forgive himself. The world might have moved on without him, but now his mum was stuck because of him. The rope moved out of his grasp eventually, and he jolted back in surprise, opening his eyes. His mum was no longer in the room, and neither was the cat officer, leaving him alone with the detective and Eraserhead. He had liked Eraserhead for just over a year, having done an extensive analysis on the underground hero, but standing over his body next to the man ruined the appeal of meeting him. It's not as if he could ask him questions. "Quirkless," the detective said, and Izuku looked up in surprise. Another quirkless statistic to add to the list. Eraserhead sighed, leaning over Izuku's body, his shoulders slumped over. "If I had just been faster, this wouldn't have happened. I should have made my rounds earlier. I could have saved him." Izuku's heart ached. No, Eraserhead couldn't seriously think it was his fault Izuku gave up. He had nothing to do with the decision. It wasn't his fault at all. "Finding a child like that, it's awful, Sakuichi," Eraserhead said, glancing to the side. His eyes were red as he took a shaky breath. Not only had Izuku damaged his mom, the only person who truly cared about him, but he had hurt a man he didn't even know. Eraserhead had found his body and must have been the one to call the police. He didn't deserve that. Izuku was truly selfish. He reached forward, trying to grab the man's hand, but failing as always. "It's not your fault," Izuku tried to tell him, but the words fell on deaf ears as Eraserhead shut his eyes and looked back down towards the metal table. The detective sighed, rubbing his back. "It wasn't your fault, Eraserhead. You see so many deaths in your line of work, and there's no way you can save them all. You know the statistics as well as I do." He pushed Izuku's curls out of his eyes, looking at his face. "He looks so much like his mother. I should have reached out to her. I could see she was so tired the first time I worked with her on a case. If I had just reached out, I could have met this boy, helped him, before it came to this." Izuku choked on tears, wiping at his eyes. No, it wasn't their fault. He was the one who made the choice. He was the one who should feel guilty. But there are a million if-onlys, the detective said, shaking his head. "If we dwell on them forever, we will miss the present and where to go from there." The staff member cleared her throat, pulling a stack of papers from the foot of the dead body's bed. "I think we should talk about something," she said, and Eraserhead stood up straight, eyes no longer as red, as he nodded. "This was a strange one." "What do you mean?" Sakuichi asked, reaching for the papers. Izuku tucked his legs up to sit cross-legged in the air, watching the trio. He longed to be with his mum, but he couldn't do anything for her, not after what he'd already done. "It's weird. We've had jumpers before." She gestured down to Izuku, and Eraserhead nodded in understanding. "He came here in a strange state. His mind was racing at levels I've never seen before. But his body was unresponsive. No heartbeat, no breathing, nothing. But his brain was running. For at least an hour, it just kept going." She pointed over at the table with the high numbers listed, shaking her head. "Most of the time when we see that, it will respond to the body's stimuli. But there was nothing. His body was fully dead before it even reached us. His body was fully dead before it reached us. His brain was never more alive, though." "What happened?" Eraserhead asked, taking the papers from the detective and frowning. "It just stopped. At, midnight, it just cut out. No decrease, no fluctuation. It just stopped. Like you'd given up or something," the staff member said, shaking her head. "I've never seen anything like it." Eraserhead's eyebrows creased in confusion. "That doesn't sound too strange. I'm not a medical professional, though." The staff member nodded, taking the papers and handing the stack back. "When his brain activity stopped, his body started again, like a light switch. His heart started beating again, and he took breaths. We tried our best to keep it stabilized, but with the brain cut off, the body died before we could stop it. Izuku floated above Eraserhead's head, glancing down at the papers. He didn't understand any of the medical jargon, frowning before stumbling and trying to right himself again. It was so hard to get used to the weightless thing. Any thoughts? The detective asked, handing the stack of papers back to the staff member who placed them in the holder. No, she said truthfully, shaking her head. I've never encountered that in all my years. Do you think it could have been because of his quirk status? She asked, and the detective raised an eyebrow. I've never treated a quirkless person before, she tried to explain quickly. The detective sighed, shaking his head. No, I'll need the official medical records sent over to my department, he said, and she nodded, grabbing the bed and wheeling it back to the wall. Izuku ignored the detective and Eraserhead, who headed up the stairs, watching the staff member cover him back up and slide him into a cubby. She shut the door and he pushed himself forward, staring at his name tag, frowning. He really was dead. He turned to her, biting his lip as he decided to try something. He reached forward and touched her wrist, making skin contact. Thank you, he said quickly, before his hand went through and he could no longer touch her. She jumped in shock, glancing around quickly before smiling slightly. You're welcome, she responded, and Izuku's heart leapt. No one had responded to him directly yet. Maybe he was making more progress. He followed her out of the morgue and up through the hospital, trying to answer questions about his quirk. She walked into a staff room, sighing and collapsing into a chair. You know that quirkless kid we got earlier? She asked her co-worker. He frowned and sighed. Poor kid got dealt with shitty hand in life. Imagine being quirkless in this day and age. She brushed him off, nodding slightly. I swear he talked to me. The man raised his eyebrows. Like his corpse opened its mouth and spoke to you even though he died hours ago? He chuckled slightly. She scoffed, pushing herself around on her chair. Isn't it a nice thought that the people we try to help can thank us before they leave the world? It's fucking terrifying, the man said. Especially that one. What the hell was happening with his damn brain? Is it part of the whole weakling thing? He asked, raising an eyebrow. The girl shook her head. Don't know. Just a nice thought I had, I guess. She turned back to her paperwork, humming slightly. Izuku frowned, sighing. Another dead end on his stupid quirk. He shut his eyes and watched 5 ropes now come up. The shortest was the girl next to him, and when he touched it, it smelled of peppermints. He touched each one in turn, settling on his mom's and pulling it towards him. The yank forward didn't scare him as much this time, but it still left him feeling uncomfortable as he opened his eyes to the new environment. The hospital waiting room was a gross place to end up, really. I need to let his school know, his mom said, wiping her eyes again. They need to send his work to me. The detective nodded, sitting in Izuku's place by his mom's side as Izuku was left floating nearby. Would you like any help, Ingo? I don't know what you're going through, but I would like to help you if you'd let me, he asked, rubbing his mom's back. He seemed nice enough, but Izuku didn't really know their relation. His mom let the detective call her by her first name, so they must be close. I'd like that, no massa, she said, leaning into his shoulder. Izuku's heart ached as he watched his mother sob again. Shutting his eyes tightly, he grabbed the coffee rope and pulled it. Being ripped into the middle of the street, Eraserhead was nowhere to be seen, but cars sped past him. Interesting. He floated above people's heads, slowly getting the hang of moving. Though he stumbled often, he couldn't always rely on other people. The days seemed to pass in a blur as he watched everything from the background, following the events that transpired after his death. He followed his mom to the school on the 3rd day after his death, the detective's hands clasped in hers. He hadn't gone a day without stopping by for Izuku's mom, bringing her food and offering for her to call whenever she needed. Izuku was glad that she had someone for her. I need to get my son's stuff and remove him from your roster, his mom said to the principal, who regarded her with a smile. He was one of the worst teachers in the school, always blaming Izuku for stuff he didn't do and giving him detentions and extra cleaning duties. He had given Kachan extra points in the past when Kachan had taken his work. It was Izuku's fault anyway. He'd been selfish to think that his work belonged to him. It belonged to those stronger, as the principal said. But he didn't say that today. I'm so sorry to hear that. Can I ask the student's name? He smiled warmly, and Izuku felt angry. He had never seen that warm smile, just a disappointed scowl as he got a hand clapped by a ruler, time and time again. His mom had never talked to this principal. Izuku had made sure of it. He didn't want his mom to hear how bad of a student he really was. "Midori Izuku," she said, her voice cracking slightly. There it was. His smile fell immediately as he regarded Izuku's mom with a disappointed look. "Did you finally decide that this school was too advanced for him?" the principal asked coldly. Izuku couldn't help but flinch at the man's words, biting the inside of his cheek. "I'm sorry?" Mom asked, frowning. Izuku could see her clutch the detective's hands. "I'm sorry?" Mom asked, frowning. Izuku could see her clutch the detective's hand tighter as he silently stayed beside her. "No disrespect to you, ma'am," the principal said, and he could see the detective tense up. "But your son is slow and a big troublemaker. He's always starting things with other students and crying because he can't defend himself when they play a little rough." He crossed his hands on his desk. "It's because of his disability, we assume." Mom tensed up, biting her lip. The detective went to say something, but she set her hand on his shoulder, standing up quickly. "My son has no disability. He is smarter than your entire grade level if you allow him to apply himself. I've seen it with my own eyes." "Ma'am," the principal started to speak, but Mom cut him off. "You will listen to me," she said, putting her hands on the desk and leaning forward. "My Izuku is the sweetest soul ever, and he wouldn't hurt a fly. I thought that his schooling was getting better, but I can see I was wrong about that. Here is what will happen." The principal tried to speak again, but she continued. "You will give me all my son's belongings. You will remove any bad marks from his transcript and give him full marks, because we both know he deserves them. And then I will report you to the school district, and they will fire you and any other teacher that played part in allowing my son to be bullied." She paused, and the principal took it as his mark to step in. He chuckled slightly, shaking his head. "I don't think so, Mrs. Midoriya. Your son doesn't deserve to take high school spots for our more deserving students. You hold no power here, and I will not be following the demands of a mother raving about her stupid child." He leant back in his chair, raising an eyebrow in a silent dare. The detective stood up, putting his hand on his shirt slowly and putting off his badge. "Lead Detective Izuku, Chief of the Musatafa Police Department," he spoke slowly, and enunciated his words, the principal paling. "You will listen to Mrs. Midoriya, and then I will head up to the school's case directly. I would also like to speak to Izuku's teachers and his classmates." He paused, smiling slightly. "That won't be a problem, will it?" The principal shook his head, turning to the filing cabinet behind him, trying to go through it. "Thank you," Mom whispered, and Izuku floated off down the halls. He couldn't be in there anymore with the principal. It was sickening to think that because of him, his mom would be treated like that. He found his class quickly enough, taking the equivalent of a deep breath before entering the room. Sliding through the closed door, the teacher was droning on about math as Izuku floated to his desk, shaking his head. Words were scraped into the desk, and he could already imagine his mom having to pay for another one. It was worse than it had ever been before, though. After Kachan's threat, it seemed more people got bold. All the words on his desk were along the lines of "take us one dive," like Kachan had said to him, and on his desk sat a bouquet of spider lilies, staring up at him with their bold colours. It was almost comical to think that all it had taken was one death threat, and he had listened. They didn't need to go through all this work if they only knew. The flowers had fresh water in the vase, and looked like well cared, despite their meaning. He looked over the class at the people that had tormented him for years, finding joy in his tears and bruises before he stopped showing them. The ones who had put him in his place time and time again, looking for excuses. They sat there as if he didn't matter, not coming to school for 3 days. It pissed him off. He was so tired of crying. It did nothing. It was just a waste of time. But he couldn't help it when tears came to his eyes from rolling down his face. Weak. He screamed, pushing his energy into his fingertips and grabbing the vase, chucking it to the floor with all his strength. It shattered on the floor, and the class went dead silent. All eyes in the class turned to the ruined desk. To him, he was finally able to be seen by his classmates. They just didn't know. No one spoke or moved, just staring at the ruined vase and flowers as Izuku floated, trying to wipe his stupid tears away. Weak. The door opened and all eyes turned to it, except for Kachan. He kept staring as if he could see Izuku floating above the vase. Izuku raised a hand to see if his friend could. Kachan turned away and watched the detective walk in. Mom was nowhere to be seen as the door shut behind him. He said nothing as he made his way across the back of the classroom, everyone's eyes tracking him. "Can I help you, sir?" Sensei asked, as the detective stopped beside Izuku, running his fingers over Izuku's ruined desk. He traced the word Deku twice over before glancing down at the ruined spider lilies. He stepped forward directly on their petals, proceeding to the front of the room. "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to leave," Sensei said, worry in his voice. "Detective Tsukuchi of the Mustafa Police Department," he said loudly, flashing his badge to the class before turning it to Sensei. Sensei immediately backed down, stepping away from the podium to the detective cadaver. "I'm here today on behalf of one of your classmates." The class erupted in whispers as they tried to figure out who called the police, words spreading like notes around the room. "Midori Izuku," the detective said, and all the news stopped once more. Heads turned back to Izuku's desk as he tried to sit on it, failing miserably as he sank through. Kachan was the first to speak, as always, commanding the room with respect. "What about that Deku?" he asked, spitting out the insult. Izuku tucked his shoulders, wishing the name wouldn't still affect him. He had a quirk, so it wasn't true, though his quirk was worthless. The detective frowned, adjusting a handful of papers he had carried in. "Bakugo Katsuki, I understand you used to be close to Izuku?" he asked, glaring at Kachan. Kachan scoffed, kicking his feet onto his desk. "I felt bad for the useless thing, until I realized he was better off alone." The detective sucked on his tongue, nodding slightly. "Midori Izuku committed offing himself 3 days ago." He glanced over the classroom that seemed frozen in time. "He jumped off a building, not too far from here." He looked back over at Kachan, whose feet had been removed from the table, his face twisted in confusion. One of Kachan's new friends was the first to speak up, taking the place of Kachan, who hadn't moved. "Good. He wasn't strong enough to survive anyways, weakling." The class murmured their agreement, though it was quieter than Izuku had ever heard them be. He could see tears roll down some of the students' faces, especially those who hadn't stepped up to help him. Some of them bounced their legs nervously, while the rest kept their eyes locked on Izuku's desk. He knew they couldn't see him, but he still felt uneasy at all the attention. The detective stepped away from the podium, up to Kachan's friend's desk. His mum was outside, crying her eyes out because she would never see her son again. The hero who found his body has taken the weekend off because seeing a child who decided death was better than life is painful. The officer who was assigned to his case hasn't slept in the past 3 days, haunted by Izuku's corpse. The hospital workers spent hours trying to save him because he didn't die on impact as we thought. He paused slightly before placing his hand on the boy's desk. He suffered for hours as his brain struggled to live before he died. But the worst part was, he suffered for years at your hands because you saw him as less than he was. Did any of you listen to his talks about your quirks and the way he looked up to each and every one of you potential heroes? Did you ever ask him what he wanted to be when he grew up? No, you didn't. You saw yourselves as better and pushed him down just to raise yourselves up. If you truly have anything else to say, I want you to go outside right now and tell his mother that you were the ones to kill her son. You were the ones who pushed him off that roof." Kachan finally spoke up, and Izuku's heart ached at his friend's slightly catching voice. So subtle no one else would hear it, but it was there. He made his choice. It's his fault. The detective whirled around and walked to Kachan's desk slowly, each step making the already silent class quieter. "How many death threats did it take?" he asked softly, and Kachan flinched. "Tell me how many times you had to jump before he listened." "1," Kachan said quietly, swallowing and looking down at his desk. "1," the detective repeated, scoffing and walking back to Izuku's desk. "1 threat and he listened. He trusted you so much that it was all it took. 1. One kid whose life was taken because you had pushed him so far that the only way to stop his pain was if he died. 1. He ran his fingers over the word carved into his desk again as Izuku floated backwards. "But that wasn't enough for you guys, was it? You had to push it further. He was already dead when you wrote these, when you left them spider lilies. He was lying in the morgue alone." He looked up from the desk, scanning each student in turn. "Good job, future heroes. You've killed your first victim, a kid who just wanted a friend." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving it in total silence. Izuku was about to follow him before a small voice stopped him. He should have stepped up. A girl, he had asked for help one time, said, rubbing her eyes. "He asked me if I could patch up a bruise. I left him. I took the last tray of food after it was knocked to the floor. I knocked it to the floor. I thought I was doing right. I hit him. I made him bleed, but I didn't care. I shouldn't have done that." "Yeah?" And Willow fought her. Kachan's friend scoffed, shaking his head. "You don't believe that man, do you? Deku was useless. It's better without him." He turned to Kachan, knocking on his desk. Right, my man? Kachan stood up quickly, startling everyone in the room. He walked to the front of the room without a sound and grabbed a container of wipes. He trekked back to Izuku's desk, looking at the words in disgust. He ripped a wipe out and started scrubbing the desk vigorously. Izuku wiped his teary eyes as Kachan scrubbed and scrubbed, other students joining in, while others cleaned up the spider lilies. Kachan's friend was the only one who didn't move, aside from the teacher who just watched. The bell rang and all the students left, even the teacher, but Kachan kept scrubbing. There was nothing left on the desk that the wipe would clear, only the carving still there. But Kachan still scrubbed until his hands were so red Izuku could see them from where he was floating. Kachan, he whispered in shock, and his friend backed up, tears streaming down his face. He had made Kachan cry because he was selfish. He took a deep breath and touched Kachan's hand, making contact. I forgive you, he said, before his hand slipped through and he couldn't touch him anymore. Deku? Kachan asked, looking around the empty room in shock, tucking his red hands into his pockets and trying to find Izuku. He wouldn't find him, no matter how hard he looked. He shut his eyes, and he willed the ropes to show up, frowning slightly. That was strange. There were only 5 ropes now, not the 6 he thought would be there. He touched each one in turn. Cat officer, mom, Detective Tsukuchi, hospital member, and a new one. Faintly sweet caramel. He pulled it and moved close to Kachan, who was still searching for Izuku in the empty room. No more race ahead. He frowned, pulling up the ropes again, and pulling his mom's. He was ripped forward into the country yard of the school, Detective Tsukuchi by his mom's side. He floated in the background as they talked, trying to piece together everything he knew about his quirk so far. He would need to try and find a way to write these all down, even if he couldn't hold a pen easily. He needed an analysis notebook again. Oh my goodness. That one was ouch. I mean, they have all been ouch so far, but this one was very ouch. I'm so sorry for how absolutely horrible this whole one has been. For me, on my horrible reading skills end, not the author's end, because the author is amazing. I really needed to do this one, but I'm like away with my family, so like they're all in the room. So I was in a car at first. I was in the car at first, and then I had to come out of the car because I needed to come back in because food's nearly ready. But where we're staying, these walls are like paper thin because it's like not a caravan, but like I don't know, but like that's the wall. That's the wall. So like you can hear all my family, and I'm really sorry about that. And my sister just kept interrupting, which also very annoying. So I'm so sorry. And then my voice kept cracking. So this one's going to be bad, and I'm really sorry about that. It's just this one is not up to my normal standard, which is saying something because I don't really have a standard. But I definitely failed KittyKqt on this. Please tell me if I'm saying the name wrong, actually. I didn't want to say it KittyKat because it's not KittyKqt, but then I also didn't know how they wanted me to say it, so anyway. Alrighty, my little Lunas, that is a wrap of this chapter. I don't have many adaptations for this one, just that it broke my heart. And Detective Tsukuchi is so right in like saying that it was their fault and that they did kill him. Make sure if you are struggling, you do find the help you need, which I know is horribly difficult, but yeah. And Bakugo just getting up and start scrubbing the desk made me like actually like my heart actually like shatter, and like the people feeling regret as you would if but so this one definitely hurt in my opinion more than the other two, but I think they said by chapter 4 it's getting a little light-hearted, a little more light-hearted anyway, and it's not as angsty, which I think is good because my heart will cry. I'll be crying one of these days while I'm recording. I know it sounds like I am because my voice keeps breaking. Happens any time I record. I really don't know why. I need more water by me. Again, why it sounds worse when I came back in here is because I didn't have my water with me. Because I accidentally left it in the car and then I didn't get back out for it because I really needed to get this one done. So, Little Lunas, this is a little reminder that you might have something you need to do or check. I hope you all have a fantastic time whenever and wherever you may be. Day, night, dust, dawn, low tide, high tide, whatever it is for you. You can call me no, you can call me @lovegood. And that was Chapter 3 of Ghostly Bonds by KittyKqt on AA3. Again, the link to this fic will be in the comment by me on this video. Bye bye, Little Lunas.